There are differences actually in the way that we taste things. So those differences can be inherent within us, or they can be changing. They're dynamic and change with age. So first of all, let's think about the things that are inherent within us. The simplest thing to look at, again, is those papillae on the tongue, those bumps on the tongue. So some people have more of those papillae and some people have less. And generally speaking, if you've got more of the papillae on your tongue and they're tightly packed and small, discrete papillae, you've got more taste receptors. And if you've got more taste receptors, you're sensitive to taste at a lower level than somebody, say, that has the papillae larger and more spaced out on the tongue. They will actually have less taste receptors, and so they'll need more of a taste to recognise it's there. And to some extent, they would find the taste within food to be less intense, less strong than somebody that has more papillae. But that's a kind of catch-all answer. It's not the whole answer to the question. So actually there are differences beyond that are due to our genetics, genetic differences in our taste receptors. So this becomes a bit more complicated. So for each type of taste, we have different receptors. Now for sweetness, we've really got 2 receptors. They're called type 1 receptors. But for bitterness, we've got over 20. They're our type 2 receptors. So type 1 receptors for sweetness we have 2, and for the umami savoury taste we also have 2, and again they're type 1 receptors. For bitterness there's over 20 of these type 2s. For salt it's different again, we mainly have sodium channels, and for sour taste we also have channels, these ion channels that let ions come through into the taste bud. So where's the genetic difference then? If you think about the one we know most about, it's one of our type 2 receptors, these bitter receptors. And we can split the population really easily into groups. So 25% of the population, a quarter of the population, is really sensitive, super sensitive to some bitter tastes. Another quarter of the population is totally insensitive to some bitter tastes, not all, but to some bitter tastes. And then there's the 50% in the middle. That's all down to your genes. So if you've got 2 sensitive alleles, you're super sensitive, 2 insensitive alleles, and you do not detect certain bitter compounds at all. Some people have 1 allele of each, and therefore they're moderately sensitive to those bitter tastes. So that's a really clearly defined difference in our tastes. But the story doesn't end there, and in fact we're still investigating really the rest of that story. So now we're beginning to understand there's some genetic differences in our type 1 receptors, which might mean that there are differences in our sensitivity to sweetness. Similarly, some researchers are finding differences on our sodium channels too. We've got a lot to learn yet to really truly understand what causes those genetic differences between us. But I said it wasn't all inherent, it wasn't all genetic. We change individually with age too. So as we get older, unfortunately, we tend to get slightly less sensitive to things. It might be because we just don't make our taste cells fast enough anymore. That means that we might have less taste cells that are active, and therefore we might be slightly less sensitive to taste as we get older.